Welcome everyone. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. You should be able to see my slides. Today, how it's going to be set up is I'll be going through these slides. This is a link. This will have the folders for both part 1 and part 2. If you click into part 2, you'll find the Google slides, the PDF slides, as well as an intro to Python slides. You don't have to pay attention to those right now unless you're inclined. It's a resource there for you if you need it, because we will be talking a little bit about Python and Python interacting with files at the end of this presentation. So I wanted to have that there if you needed it. Otherwise, let's get started. So today we will be going over the command line, and just in case you don't know, that's what this is. It's your terminal / the command prompt line. It's a way that you can interact with your file system without using the GUI or the graphical user interface that is this right here. This is what you're probably more familiar with. So it lets you interact with your files in your computer in a more direct way, which means you can combine tools and scripts and processes really efficiently and implement them on large batches of files all at once. So if you're interested in renaming, copying, backing up, moving, doing lots of things to lots of files all at once, this is a great way to do that and to reproduce that work and to share it with other people. So it's a really great time saver, especially if you do a lot of file work, whether on a personal level or on an archival level. So there are a few ways to get it. On Windows, the default kind of built-in command line interface is command prompt, also known as CMD. So you can search for it in the start menu to get command prompt. You can go to accessories, command prompt, the Windows key and X, and search for it. So there are a few different options. I'd like to note that this built-in option in Windows is a little less powerful than what you'll see in Unix systems, so like Mac OS, Linux, which is known as terminal, and that's what I have here, and what I'm going to be demonstrating here today is terminal. So if you find yourself using command prompt on a Windows and feeling a little bit frustrated, I'll go back here, frustrated by the lack of utility or difficulty, there is something called PowerShell, which has very similar functionalities. PowerShell is both a language and a command line interface. It's like a big bundle of stuff. So I'd like to put that out there. I'm not going to be going over any PowerShell scripting today, but I just wanted to put it out there for the Windows users. It's a really powerful tool. And I think after a certain level of command prompting, you'll be like, I'm ready for the next level. And the next level is PowerShell. And so I wanted to put that out there. On Mac, it's Git terminal in your applications folder, or you can do a spotlight search and search terminal and it should pop up. I recommend keeping a terminal icon in your dock for easy access, especially if this stuff is fun for you. It's nice to just be able to click it open. And once you have it open, this is what it should look like. So here's my own little personal default terminal login, and this is what it will look like if you're on Windows once you open up command prompt. And you can follow along if you like. You can also just sit back and enjoy the show, whatever's easiest for you. And then we'll get to some basics. I wanted to also point out some formatting I've done with these slides. Anything that's highlighted in blue are the commands that are going to work on a Mac OS or Linux or Unix system. And then the commands highlighted in red are going to work in Windows command prompt. Frustratingly, it's not universal. And then PowerShell is also different. So it's one of those things where it's a lot of different stuff, but the positive side of all of this is that it's a really common and useful tool. So there are tons of people who have had the same issues and problems and solutions as you might find, so it's all very Googleable. But that's the format if you're wondering what the different colors mean. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to be working a lot in the actual command prompt here. So this is what it looks like. It's blank. The first command I want to point out is pwd or cd in Windows, and this is how you figure out where you are in the system. That's the downside of a command line, is there's no pictures. It's kind of hard to tell intuitively where you are. So using a command like pwd will print your working directory, or with cd on Windows, it'll do the same. And this shows you your file path. If you remember from part 1, I talked about file paths as kind of breadcrumbs that show you where you are. That's a good way to think about this. So I'm in my own computer and I'm in my own user account. So this is my own personal user account on my computer. This should look like users and whatever your name is on your computer. And then we have desktop. That means I'm on the folder that is my just background desktop. And then I'm specifically in the folder workshops file management. So that kind of gives me an idea of where I am. The next command that's really useful for just orienting yourself is either ls or dir. These commands both tell you the contents of the folder you're looking in. So if you aren't sure like exactly where you are based on your path, taking a look at the contents with ls can show you all the stuff in this folder. And just to prove that what's going on here is right, here we have the file management folder. So how I got there is I went to desktop, right? And then I went to workshops, clicked into there, and then I went into my file management folder, and these are all the contents. So it's the same as in your file folder system. It's just a little bit more direct. So I wanted to prove that I'm not talking too much nonsense, not yet at least. So those are really good orienting commands. You can add, I called it spice here, you can add spice to these commands by using something called flags. Again, these are a little bit different depending on what system you're using, but they add extra specifications to the end of the commands to modify them, to make them do something a little bit extra or a little bit different. There are tons of these, so many, and each different command has quite a few flags. And if you're ever wondering what the flags are for a command, you can usually, I frequently Google like ls terminal command flags, and you can find documentation, a list of all the flags from various places. So they're out there. Knowing a few handy ones can really get you far. You definitely don't need to know all of them. It's one of those things where you don't know it until you encounter a problem that requires a flag as a solution, and then you remember it forever. It's definitely one of those. So in terminal, the -L command stands for long, so it gives you the long answer. And here I'll spread this out so it's all on one line. So it gives you all of the information about the documents. So this can be important, especially if you're sharing documents with different people. It gives you the permissions. So it tells you that I can read and write on this file, which is great because I want to be able to edit it and look at it. It tells you who the owner is, and it tells you when it was last modified. So you can get a lot of information that's not necessarily directly available here, or isn't directly in the list. So let's you know a little bit more about what's going on. I'd like to note here that on Windows, the dir command is recursive, which means it'll tell you everything that's in a folder, including other folders that have contents in them. So the list can get pretty long pretty quickly. This isn't a bad thing, but it's good to keep in mind because not every command is gonna affect subfolders and subfolders. All right, the file path. This is the cd command. It's the same on Windows and terminal, which is great. So let's talk a little bit about like how these things work. So far, we've just typed in, pwd and ls. Those are the commands, and some commands take arguments, which isn't as combative as it sounds. They're fun, but it's what you want to do the command on or what you want to do the command with. So this command cd stands for change directory. We're going to be using directory and folder interchangeably here. So if I say directory, I mean folder. If I say folder, I mean directory. And the argument this command takes is the file path. So that's where you want to go. You'll see we don't have any folders here, but if we go up a little bit, so you can see these are additional things we can do with CD. You can do CD dash to go back and forth between two folders, and you can use CD ... to go up a directory. This is all maybe a little vague, so let me show you. So we have CD ... It doesn't return anything, so it just expects you to know your own file path systems, which in my opinion is kind of a big ask. I definitely don't always know like my entire file path, but luckily we have pwd to see where we are. All right, so you can see we're in workshops. We used to be in workshops file management, but we've gone up a step. We've gone back one. We've backtracked one breadcrumb, and you can see here are the contents of workshops. These are workshops I've given, and we can go back to file management. That's where we want to be. So we can do CD file management. And you may have noticed that appeared really fast. What I did is I pressed tab. And what's nice about Terminal is it will autofill things for you. So there's only one folder in this little group of folders here that starts with FI. So it automatically knows that if I press tab, I mean file management, because that's the only option. You press enter, and we'll double check with PWD, and we've gone to file management. So CD is kind of like the door you create for yourself in between folders. It's how you take a step forward or backward. And it's really useful. You'll be typing it a lot. It's a great way to navigate. I'd like to point out that if you're already in a folder, you don't need to type the entire file path. So for here, I just typed CD file management. I didn't need to type this entire thing. If for some reason, let's say I wanted to go to gentle intro, I could CD back up to workshops. That's where we are, and then CD into my gentle intro workshop, and that's where we are. So I could take a step back and then a step forward, or you can type out the entire file path directly. And again, I'm pressing tab to autocomplete. I was telling Mary before, I'm both bad at typing and bad at spelling, so sometimes I can get a little tripped up. This tab autocomplete is really helpful, especially in this situation. So I'm tabbing, and then I can do file management. So I've completed this path. I've heavily utilized tab to remember what's going on, and I can press enter, and I go there. So that's kind of two ways. You can take individual steps at a time, or if you know the entire file path of where you want to go, you can just use that. I do want to show a fun little tip. Sometimes you don't know the whole file path, but you do have access to your GUI system. It may sound like that's like if you're using Terminal, why are you looking at your folders? I do both all the time, especially when implementing Python scripts in different folders all at once. I'll need to like drag in the folder I want to implement that script in. If you grab this from your thing, you can drag it over to here, and it will also paste in the entire file path of the folder you dragged in. So that's also pretty fun, and it will just tell me that it's a directory if I press enter with no command. So there are lots of different ways to get to the file path that you need. And that's honestly one of the easiest ones, the drag and drop. So CD, very useful. And using PWD or dir to figure out where you are, also good. I use them in conjunction quite frequently. So that's how we're taking some steps, but now we need to actually do stuff. We know how to walk into the room. Now we want to like rearrange the furniture of the room. Don't let me know if that's a bad analogy. I'm sticking with it. So we have a few ways to create things. We have a few ways to interact with our environment. The first one I want to talk about is mkdir. It stands for making a directory. It makes a directory. This creates new folders. If you see where we are, let's see what we've got. All right, let's mkdir sample folder. And this also doesn't return anything. So the command is mkdir. The argument it takes is the name of the directory you'd like to create. Just like with CD, if you're already in the file path where you want to work, you don't need to do the whole file path. But if I wanted to make a new directory in a separate folder, I'd have to type out the whole entire file path, and then finally the name of the folder of where I'd want to create it. So you can get really specific. Sometimes that's useful, but the good thing to know is wherever your PWD is, wherever you are currently, that's where you're going to be working unless you specify otherwise. So the default is always you're going to be moving furniture where you're standing. Right? But you can do a specific file path if you want. So we're making folders. Let's check that it's there. If we do ls, yep, sample folders there. If we go over to the GUI, sample folder there. It's empty. We didn't put anything in it yet, but we do. We've got a folder going on. We've got a folder. All right. So some file path notes. This is what I was talking about. If you don't get specific, it's just going to assume that where you are is where you want to be. And I already showed you the fun little drag thing. That is strangely useful. I don't know why I'm such a fan of it, but it is a really great utility. They got rid of it on Windows 7. which was quite a kerfuffle in the community, but I believe they've brought it back with Windows 10. So if you're Windows 10 or later, I think you're able to do that once again. Or if you never updated past Windows 7, which maybe is a security issue, but you get to keep that utility. All right, now let's get a little more involved with mkdir. It's a really great little command. So you can make multiple folders at once, all in one go. It takes the command in curly brackets on terminal, and they're separated just by commas, no spaces. If you attended last session, you'll know that spaces in directory names and folder names can really cause a lot of issues, but that doesn't stop you from being able to do it. So if you have spaces in between like that, it'll assume that space is a part of the folder name. So watch out. I know it's like super hard habit to break to have spaces after commas, but it'll assume you want them there. And then also in terminal, we have a P flag, which allows you to create subfolders. So it allows you to create a new folder and then populate it with even more folders. So that's, so we're getting a little more powerful here. You have the same commands, utilities in Windows. They just look a little different. With Windows, it's no curly brackets, no commas, only spaces. So that's how you do it there. And then your mkdir command already has a subfolder utility. You don't need any special flags. So those are the differences there. Let's get even more foldery here. So we've got this. Let's go in to sample folder. We'll mess around there. So I want to do folder 1 and folder 2. All right, we've got those there. And if we go check, they're right here for us. Wonderful. And let's say we want to make this. So big folder and a subfolder. We've got that here. So I hope you're seeing like how much quicker this is than just creating folders in the file system, especially when you start building up commands like this. It can go really, really quick. And making folders is maybe not the most, generally useful thing, but it is a great way to quickly build out a file structure. And it allows you to play around with how folders are organized really quickly. So you're not constantly creating and deleting and then creating again folders using this file system, because that can get really tedious. It's a lot of clicking, and this is almost no clicking. It's mostly typing. So it gets really, really fast and efficient, really quick. All right, we have folders. We built them out. We have a little structure going. Now we want to put stuff in it. A lot of people already have, text available. So we have a way to interact with text files. I'm going to quickly create some text files here in folder. We'll do folder 1. That one looks cute. Folder 1. I don't know if you just saw what I did here. So I mistyped and I tabbed over, and there are 2 things named folder. So I didn't know which one I wanted because they both start with folder. So I couldn't find it because nothing's named that. Totally fine. These errors are usually pretty straightforward, and if you don't understand what they are, they're 100% Googleable. So if you ever get an error you don't understand, I just copy and paste it right into Google, and usually someone else has gotten the same error as me and hopefully posted a solution. 9 times out of 10 they have. But what I'm doing right now here, I'm scrolling through old commands, and I'm doing that with my up button. So this is also a great little fun utility. You can quickly cycle through past commands, so you don't have to type at all, especially if you're doing the same thing kind of over and over again. So that's also fun. Anything to not type, those are my favorite tools, are the ones where I don't type. So we're in folder 1, nothing's here. I'm going to quickly create some files. So the stuff I'm going to do, I want you to just take note of, but I'll talk about it a little bit later, but I want to see the examples. So we'll do Katie, because that's my name. We're going to do these .txt. So what I've done, this touch command allows me to quickly create files. So if I go to folder 1, you'll see Katie 1, 2, and 3 are in there. And if I use cat, I can see what's in those files. Okay, so if I do cat Katie_1, nothing shows up because they're all empty. I've just made them. I haven't added any contents to them. But hopefully that shows you this little touch thing. Shows you how you can quickly create a lot of files at once, which is useful, especially if you want to practice bash scripts and you want to quickly create like kind of dummy folder and file systems. You don't have to open up a bunch of like text editor files and save them as empty ones. You can quickly create empty text files with touch, which I love a dummy folder system. I love a practice folder system. So I use this a lot to create a workspace for myself. If you want something with lines, let's create something right here. So this little thing right here, this symbol is called a redirect. I also call it a caret. It allows you to pipe stuff in. This cat, it stands for concatenate, which maybe, I don't know, that was never intuitive to me, but it allows you to create and look at and edit files. And if you use the pipe, it allows you to type stuff. So you'll notice all of this has started with a little money sign, a little dollar sign. Now I don't have that. And I'm able to type, and if I press enter, it's not a command. It's right. So I'm not able to get out of this. It's because I'm actually writing in the text file Katie_4.text. And if I want to quit, I can press Control D and then I'm out of there. So you can actually edit and type text files in the command line. Again, the utility overall, but it is good to know. And you never have to open up a text editor again if you don't want to. And then I can do cat without the pipe for Katie4, and it tells me what's in there. So you can edit, work with, create, and open up and read text files all within the terminal here. You can also read the first 10 or last 10 lines of an example text. This is really great, especially if you have a lot of text files that are named similarly, and you want to be able to read just really quickly what's going on in them, but you don't want to have to read the whole thing. Like, let's say it's like a 20-page paper. You don't want to necessarily print out 20 pages of text into this because it's not super readable, but the first 10 lines can really be useful for figuring out what's going on. So know that you can read text files. You don't have to do any type of opening them up. So we have files, right? We've got 4 here. You can move them in between folders. With Linux, Mac OS, Unix terminal ones, move and rename are the same. And the logic behind that is when you rename a file, you are moving it to a different file path. That's the justification I've come up with in my head for why that works. So let's say we want to change Katie1 to just example. So it takes, the command is mv and it has 2 arguments, the old file name and then whatever you want to name it, right? And it doesn't return anything. Sometimes that can be a little like disorienting because it's not telling you if you've done it right. You can count on the command line to tell you if you've done it wrong, though. It will tell you if you've done it wrong. You just have to be confident in yourself that you've done it right, which is why, again, I like practice folders. So let's see what's in this directory. It's changed, no more Katie1. We've got an example.txt. You can see that mirrored here in the file system too. So this is how you rename stuff, and you can rename stuff in a batch way as well. We'll go over that in a little bit. And this, again, also is used to move things. So let's say we want to move example.txt to folder 2, right? We can do users Katie desktop. And this seems super tedious, like typing all this out, and it is. I'm not going to try to argue that it's not. But after you move stuff a few times, you get used to your file path. And also, eventually, hopefully, you've created a bash script or a Python script. And then we put example.txt because that's what we want to name it. You create a Python script that does it for you, so you don't have to remember it. But here we go. So in folder 1, we have no more example, and it's moved to folder 2. And again, I'll show you in a little bit like a way to do this a little bit more batchy, so you can move a bunch at once a little bit more programmatically, but it's important to know You can move and rename files very easily through the command line. And if you're working on Windows, they're a little bit more straightforward with how they've named things. The rename command also takes 2 arguments, the same way as MV does, but it's just called rename. They've named it sensibly. And then the move command is move the entire word. So it's good to know, but other than that, they work very, very similarly. They're just different, they have different names for the commands, which is nice because sometimes the commands work a little differently, so they're not as one-to-one. All right, so we also want to be able to make copies. This command is cp on Mac OS. It again, just like move, takes 2 arguments, the old file name, and then the name you want to make that copy be named. And just like with MV, you can set the file path of what you're creating. So let's see, where are we? We're still in folder 1. So even though we moved something to folder 2, we didn't move, we just moved the thing. Let's say we want to, we'll remake KD1 just so that 2 is not lonely up there at the front. And let's say we want to make a copy of KD1 and put it in folder 2. So we can do cp KD_1, and then we can type out the file path. Shouldn't have made so many subfolders. I'm such a sucker for subfolders, even if they're not the best option. But here we are. So let's go over into our file path and see. You can see we've made a copy here. And just to prove to you that it works with copying, we have our KD4 text, and that's the one with actual stuff. I'm going to go up 1 here. So we have the old thing. And then I'm going to go all the way back. So I didn't have to retype everything, but I'm going to move KD4 as well. And you'll see that it copies it, including the contents. So it's actually making a copy. One thing I want to note with copying, both here and in Windows, it's just copy. If you're copying something at an archival level, if it's important to you that the copies be exactly the same, that's something you're going to want to take note of. Because sometimes when copying files, just because of the random nature of the entire universe we live in, sometimes those copies don't get copied exactly correctly, for better or worse. So there are tools out there that you can use to make sure. You can use hash values, and you can use more secure copying tools to copy things like at an archival level quality. And there's definitely documentation out there for that. But I wanted to make note just so no one just uses the cp command and then the file gets messed up. So I wanted to point that out. But you can copy, and copy them to different places. All right, and now we have all this stuff. I've made quite a few folders for myself. If I go up here, just a sample folder, it's a whole big thing. Now we can remove stuff. On terminal and Mac, it's rm is the command, and then the argument is the file name that you want to remove. You can remove files and folders. If your folder has something in it, it will warn you. And that's the only time you'll ever get a warning, is if there's something inside of a folder. Otherwise, it's completely deleted. You are not granted the grace of a recycling bin or a trash bin. It's deleted forever permanently. So watch out, be careful. If you want to delete a folder with something in it, the -R flag is how you remove folders with things in it. I also want to make note of this little thing right here. I know this is a group filled with librarians, so I'm assuming people are familiar with wildcards. But if you're not, they are supported here. So wildcards, the little star right here, means this matches any and all characters that will come before a .txt. So this command will remove any files that end with .txt. The question mark wildcard is also supported in terminal, and that stands for just one character. So let's go into folder 1. You got to tell it what to do. Folder 1. You see we have a lot of text files in here. If I do rm wildcard.txt, I get no warning. It just does it. But now the folder is completely empty. Everything's gone. So let's cd back up, and we'll cd into folder 2. You can see we've got example and then the 2 KDs. Let's say we just want to delete the 2 KDs. we can do rm Katie underscore wildcard dot text, and it removes the Katies, both 1 and 4. So you can play around with wildcards to selectively delete large batches of items. You don't have to go through and find the ones. If you know the patterns in the file names, you can delete things very quickly. So we'll CD up here, and then we'll remove both of the folders. Again, with that wildcard, it tells us it's a directory. So sometimes you have to force it. And if you do the R flag, it gives you no argument. It's kind of like pulling out the boss card to your terminal command. It says, oh, I know what I'm doing. And then it trusts that you know what you're doing. Then you can see all we have left is big folder, and that's true here as well. So you can remove stuff very, very efficiently. It's a really great way to quickly get rid of stuff. But beware, you will quickly absolutely get rid of stuff. In Windows, the command is delete. It works very similarly. The only difference is you have to specifically use rmdir to get rid of folders and directories. And instead of a dash R as the flag, it's a \s is the flag. But otherwise, the functionality is the same. It's just a few different commands. All right. So I also want to point out that you can count things. The WC is the word count command, and it tells you things about your files. So let's make another katie.txt, and we'll do hello, and that'll be it. So we have katie.txt here. If we do WC, which is the command, and then the file name, which is the argument, it tells us how many lines we have, how many words we have, and how many bytes something is. So lines, words, and bytes. So it's a great way to quickly figure out the size of your files. Here we have kind of, I point this out because it's a weird example, the -L flag here. You'd think it'd be like, oh, that's the long flag. It'll give me even more. No, it gives you less. It's because here that flag stands for just lines. So this will give you the line count of the text only. So it's kind of frustrating, but the flags are different for different commands. And again, that's annoying, but ultimately Googleable. So no one, I think, in the history of ever working with this has ever memorized everything. And if they have, it's because they're the one who wrote it. So there's no expectation from anybody in the world to have any of this memorized, which is why things like Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange exist. Someone else wrote down the instructions, and that's always there for you. All right, so I mentioned wildcards. The star stands for, will match 0 or more characters in that string, and the question mark will match 1 character. So those are really useful, especially if you have a pattern of naming, like if you've named all of your things with dates, and that's how you're using version control, and you want to delete everything from before 2020. And if 2020 is the first thing in your file name, you could put 2020 and then star and then dot whatever the extension you want to delete, and run that command, and it would delete everything that started with 2020. So these tools, combined with a consistent and well-documented file naming and folder naming system, it's endless magic in terms of being able to control your files in an easy way. So if you'd like to, if you didn't attend the first session, go back and look. And some of the file naming conventions and rules I mentioned in there will definitely make these commands even more powerful because you've used patterns that are really consistent. All right, so here we have the right-facing caret, also known as the greater than sign, and this lets you concatenate or direct commands into something. So we can use WC to count the lines, and then if we put a right caret to it, it will direct the output of that command into whatever we tell it. So let me show you. So WC katie.txt, this is the output we get, gives us some information. Let's say I want to store that somewhere. I can do WC katie.txt, and I can direct that into a newly created, so this is not something that exists yet, line count.txt. And if we take a look, now we have line count.txt. And if you remember, cat lets us look inside of it. We can look inside and it has the output of our commands. Kind of silly and trivial with just one at a time. But if you need a total, like if you have maybe 100, 200 files in a folder and you want to know how many lines each of those is, you could run, WC star.txt and it would run it for all of the text files in that folder. And you could pipe that out to, line to whatever you want to call it. And it will give you a text file with all of the line counts for all of the files in that folder in like less than 5 seconds. So there's no need to go in and open up folders to find information for them. And then you don't even have to like worry about reading it in the command line. You can pipe it out to a separate text file. This is really great as like a real world use case. If I'm frequently moving files, like backing them up to a separate folder, I will have like the date modified, all printed out and put into a log folder. So I can see like the log of all the dates of all the times like something's been modified in a folder. So it's a really quick way to see if things have been modified recently or backed up recently, something like that. So it's a good way to pull file information really quickly and then put it somewhere that's easy to read. So that pipe, this little redirect character is really useful. I'd also like to note you can use the double caret to add something to the end of a file. So we could also do wc.txt line count.text. And if we look at line count, it has all that stuff appended to it. And you can see now it's also counting. So we had the original Katie, and now it's also counting line 2. And then it's also counting itself, and it's giving you the total. So it has a bunch of stuff in it now, and it's kind of recursive. The more you do it, the more it'll count. All right, so that's kind of how you can put together commands. And that's the takeaway here, and we'll talk about it more here. But you can kind of string commands together. So if you say, oh man, I know I can do this counting, and I know I can do this other type of changing, but I wish I could do them together, you probably can. It's really easy to string together commands, both using this symbol and this. This is the pipe symbol. If you're wondering where it is, I can see on Mac, it's above the return key. If you press shift after the backward facing slash, that's the pipe symbol. And it's how you redirect the output of one command into another command. So this is a classic example. It's sort. So if I go here, we will make some more folders or some more files. All right, so we've got a few files, 1, 2, 3 example and some other things. If we do ls, we see all of them and it's just in the order that they are in the folder. It's not automatically ordered at all. And if we do sort, nothing happens and it gets really mad because it's like there's nothing to sort and I have to control D. It gets a little confused because that's not a full command and because sort needs a thing to sort. So we can take this output of ls and we can pipe it to sort, and that tells sort what to sort. So let me show you. ls pipe sort. Now we get everything in the folder printed out in a sorted file. We could even go further and redirect that to a text file, sorted.txt. So sorted.txt now contains a sorted list of all of our folders. So you can really start stringing stuff together with pipe and redirect. All right. And there will be, I know it's a lot of information, there will be a time at the end for Q&A. I'll finish up here in about 5 minutes. So as you can see, like I showed, you can string these together for a lot of different commands. There's a lot more to piping and redirecting, but it's a good place to get started. So for example, what do you think this does? We have listing all the things, and we have counting the number of lines, right? But WC is going to count whatever we get it from here. So this will give us the total number of files in our folder, because it's counting the lines that ls returns. So we have 8 files in our folder. So you can kind of start to see how this really adds together to quickly understand what's going on in your file system. And when we have, tiny little folders like this, it's not that big of a deal. But when you have giant folders full of hundreds or even thousands of files, it gets way easier to do this than to do things manually. All right. And then finally, a note on loops. This is where stuff really gets to be time savvy. Loops are are most intuitive in terminal. You can do loops in command prompts, but they tend to look really ugly and aren't super readable. So if loops are something that's interesting to you, I highly recommend, if you're on Windows, taking a look at PowerShell, because it's way more intuitive in PowerShell. Just as a note, the basic format of a loop is for whatever thing you want to do in this group of many things. You can do this thing for it, and you'll do it to every single one in the group. So for X in group of X, do thing to X. And then when all the X's have been done to, it's finished. Maybe not the most eloquent, but hopefully an example will help. So for example, we go here, we have a lot of different text things. The do echo file name done is a command that will list all of the files that end in this in our folder. This maybe isn't super useful because we could always do just ls.txt and it does the same thing. But you can see if we do for file name, and this can be anything, this is a variable. If you name it something that makes sense, it's a little easier to understand, but it could technically be anything. And then in our group of text things, if we press enter, you'll see it has this little caret. That means it knows we're doing a loop. It understands what's going on. We can say do, and then echo. And you'll notice I'm doing this thing. The quotation marks are there to handle any spaces that may be in your file name that may otherwise mess up the command. If you were, quite compelled by my arguments last workshop, you probably don't have any spaces in your file names, so that they won't be there to mess them up. But just because we follow the rules of good file naming doesn't mean everyone else is going to. So that will be helpful for preventing that. And then the $sign file name is just calling this variable. So that's how we format it to be called, $sign, and then that thing. And then we can press done, and it will print out all of the file names that end in text. Right, so this is where you can start changing things in a batch way. For example, let's say we want to make a copy of every single file in our folder. We can do for file name that starts with text. We'll echo it just to know that it's done. And then we'll copy it with the copy command. And remember, that takes two arguments. It takes the file name, and then it takes what you want to copy it as. And you'll notice the copy right here is not in quotation marks. That's because it's not a variable. Everything's going to get that. So it's a consistent thing. So it doesn't need to be in quotes or be called with this because it's not a variable. And then we're done. And if we go over here, everything's been copied. So if you need to quickly make a copy of everything, you can do it for a batch. And this is really great if you have files of multiple extension types and you only want to copy a certain extension, or you only want to move a certain extension. Like, let's say you're working with images and you have both PNGs and TIFFs of every image, and you want to move the PNGs to a separate folder. You could do for file name in star.png, do mv file name to the new folder path, done. All of the PNGs moved. You don't have to worry about missing anything because the computer doesn't miss anything. So loops are where it really gets powerful. If you want to share your loops, I want to note you can save loops as bash scripts, which is it's a scripting language. It's what we've been typing in. You can save them as .bash scripts and send them to people, and then they can run them on their machines as well. So it's a really quick way to share workflows. So if you have a workflow of creating backups of all the files and then moving all those backups to a folder of backups that you've created, and you want to do that really quick and have someone else do it, you could create a bash script, they could run it, and then it'll be done, and no one has to ever think about looking at a file again because you've done it programmatically. And then some thoughts on the internet. 99% of the time, someone else out there has had the same problem as you and has already asked about it. Using Google is great, and I think the formula, whatever you want to do plus terminal or command prompt, it usually gives me results. And if it's on Stack Overflow or Stack Exchange, it's pretty trustworthy. They remove anything that's gonna break your computer. But always make sure to set up a practice folder and test out first, especially if the files are important. We're near the end of time, but I do want to mention that everything I've mentioned today can also be done in Python. I'm not going to cover it because I'm not going to assume that everyone is set up with Python and ready to go. But again, as I mentioned, I do have intro to Python slides if you need a place to get started. Even if you don't like my slides, at the very end, there are lists to recommended tutorials for getting set up. But Python is useful in the same way loops in this scripting is. It allows you to implement methods and workflows and reuse them over and over again and share them with other people. So it's great if you're working on a project and you want everyone to be able to do the same thing to files, no matter where they are. And it helps you be consistent in your workflow, not have to waste time and do something over and over. You can get the computer to do it for you. So Python's useful in the same way that using the command line is useful. It saves you time. Python is an object-oriented scripting language. You can execute your Python files in the command line. We're already experts at that, so that's pretty easy. It has a bunch of different data types, and it has loops, just like the for loops we've already seen. It also has if-else loops and while loops. And it has the ability to open up files, read files, write to files, append files, and then obviously close them. If you are interested in further exploring, you should know that Python has all the abilities we've talked about today. And if you go beyond that to using the OS module, you can get even more powerful. So if everything all the utility I've talked about here today sounds really useful, but you're more comfortable with Python, looking into the OS module, which is a standard module, so you don't have to download anything, can really take your Python programming to the next level. So if that's something that's interesting to you, in this folder, I have a little OS practice module full of Python code if you'd like to read it and see what's going on there. And you can see how Python can work to handle file folders. At the very end of these slides are more resources and further reading if you're interested. Bye, everybody.